Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor and the privilege to welcome you all today to this seminar on strengthening civil defense in the European Union, arranged together by Folk and Försvar and SIEPS. My name is Maud Holma von Heinen. I'm the Secretary General of Folk and Försvar, and I am delighted to welcome the keynote speakers of today, Hadja Lahbib, the European Commissioner for Equality, Preparedness and Crisis Management, and Carl-Oskar Bohlin, the Minister for Civil Defense in Sweden. I think I speak for everyone when I say that we are grateful to have the Commissioner and the Minister here with us today, and we look forward to hearing your perspectives on how to strengthen civil defense in the European Union. Some of you may be familiar with Folk and Försvar, but just briefly, we are a non-governmental autonomous organization dedicated to promoting informed public dialogue on issues related to security and defense policy, civil defense and contingency, as well as global security trends. We offer a variety of activities, such like seminars like the one today, conferences, podcasts, as well as scenario-based trainings, all with the ambition to enhance the public awareness and interest in matters related to Swedish security. We are also very glad to coordinate this seminar today together with the SIEPS. And therefore, I will now hand over to the Director of SIEPS, Göran von Sydow, to say a few words.
Well, thank you so much, Maud, and also on behalf of SIEPS, the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies, I'm happy to welcome you here to this timely event. At SIEPS, we conduct and promote research on themes of European integration and European politics. We do so by publishing lots of studies, organizing events such as this, and we also do training for civil servants. And the key of this mission is to bring together experts and also policymakers and to have an exchange of views. And this is what we will have during today's seminar. Now, of course, Europe, we find ourselves in a very serious and difficult security situation with a war and a geopolitical context that is very demanding. This has led to an increased focus on military build-up and spending across Europe, but also on the civilian aspects and how to increase European resilience and capacity to deal with difficult challenges. Last year, Commission President von der Leyen, she tasked the previous president of Finland, Sauli Niinistö, to write a report on how to prepare Europe better in terms of civilian and military functioning. And the Commission has launched its strategy in this context. And I think this will be an important topic of today's discussion that I'm very much looking forward to. Now I will hand over to the moderator, Lotta Lundmark from Folk och Försvar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to this seminar titled Strengthening Civil Defense in the European Union. We are delighted to see a packed venue here at Folk och Försvar, and also welcome to those of you who are watching this online, either live or afterwards. My name is Lotta Lundmark, and I am Program Manager for Crisis Management and Civil Defense at Folk och Försvar, and I will moderate this seminar. Civil defense is one of two parts of the Swedish concept of a total defense, including both civilian and military actors. The civil defense has a few fundamental tasks. One of them is to enable and support armed forces, and another is to protect and to provide for the population. The concept is built upon the idea that in times of crisis or war, the whole society is needed to create resilience, and this is best done together. This seminar aims to deepen the understanding of the work of strengthening civil preparedness within the EU context and discuss the future landscape of these issues. In just a moment, we will hear remarks from Hadja Lahbib, the European Commissioner for Preparedness and Crisis Management, who previously also served as the Foreign Minister of Belgium. And after that, we will listen to Carl-Oskar Bohlin, the Swedish Minister for Civil Defense, and we will conclude this seminar with a panel consisting of Katarina Engberg from Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies, SIEPS, and Sara Myrdal from the Swedish Civil Contingency Agency, MSB. With that said, it's our privilege to welcome up the European Commissioner for Preparedness and Crisis Management, Hadja Lahbib. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for your warm welcome. It's a real pleasure to be with you today in beautiful Stockholm, and a special thanks also to Minister Bohlin for your invitation. As Commissioner for Preparedness, I hear a lot, I have to say, about Sweden. You set the gold standards for preparedness across our union, so I'm very excited to be here and to see firsthand how it works. It is, by the way, no coincidence that I'm starting my visit here with you. Försvar is, sorry for my pronunciation, it's my first time in Swedish, but I'll try my best. It's the place to discuss preparedness without taboo. You are open, you are inclusive, and grounded in trust between citizens and institutions, which is really a key. I recently attended an informal ministerial meeting on civil preparedness organized by the Coalition of the Willing from Nordic, Baltic and Benelux countries, and you will also there, dear Minister Bohlin. And just last week, I was in Spain to highlight the importance of preparing for the wildfire season, let's say, so both at national but also at EU level. Spain and Sweden are geographically far apart and face maybe different risks, but both countries have one powerful thing in common. You are determined to keep your citizens safe in this more dangerous world. And the European Union is right there with you. Dear friends, the risks facing our societies today are more complex than ever. Climate change is hitting harder, geopolitics are shifting fast, and Europe is facing new threats from cyber and hybrid attacks to disinformation and attack on our critical infrastructure. These threats are real, and they demand a united response. Here in Sweden, the devastating wildfires of 2018 were a kind of wake-up call for all of us. In the EU, we are now taking strong action. We launched our preparedness strategy in March. It is concrete, it is comprehensive, and it is really operational. It takes what we call an all-hazard, whole of society and whole of government approach. This means we are getting everyone on board to be ready for anything. Because we believe everyone should play a part in this, in keeping our society safe, citizens, but also the private sector, businessmen, businesswomen, and the civil society, of course, not just the experts or the governments, the local authorities and the professionals. Preparedness is also a mindset, a way of thinking, and that is why we are working to build this new culture that you have in the whole continent, the European continent. And here in Sweden, you certainly understand this, and you will certainly also play a very important role in our global preparedness strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens and communities are the backbone of their own security. That is why our EU preparedness strategy puts people right at the heart of our preparedness. I know this was also a strong focus of the Swedish presidency. I was Minister of Foreign Affairs on this period, and your 2024 preparedness brochure is an excellent example. I highlighted your brochure during my press conference for the launch of our new EU preparedness strategy, and I recently met a visually impaired Swedish woman who had read the Braille version of the brochure, a great example of leaving no one behind. We are building greater awareness across the EU, not to scare people, of course, but to make sure they are ready. With simple ideas, we want people to be self-sufficient for at least 72 hours in a crisis, just like in Sweden, but I know that you are talking about 1 week, so we still have to progress, because you are talking about 1 week of autonomy. Our EU strategy also highlights the need for investment that serve both civilian and military purposes, what we call dual use by design. We need to strengthen civil-military cooperation, not just in emergencies, but from the start, in planning, training, and joint exercises. When a crisis strikes, everyone should know what is their role. This is very important to have a clear chain of command. Civil preparedness must become a kind of way of life, and Sweden is an inspiration for this. Your total defense concept is an example of the whole of society and whole of government preparing together. As Europe faces new security threats, we are working to build support for a European civil defense mechanism inspired in part by Sweden. This is an opportunity to bring citizens and communities into the heart of preparedness and to strengthen cooperation between civilian and military actors on planning our capabilities. This new mechanism could build on the Union civil protection mechanism with a sharper focus on civilian defense preparedness. Now, we are focused on putting our new strategy into action. In early July, we will adopt its very first deliverable, our EU stockpiling strategy. This will strengthen Europe's autonomy and keep our citizens safer. One more thing, very important to me as Commissioner for Equality, we all know that disasters are not gender blind or gender neutral. In emergencies, existing inequalities deepen and the risk of gender-based violence rises. As Commissioner for Equality, I am determined to make sure our preparedness efforts leave no one behind, and especially the half of humanity. We are working to promote gender equality at every stage of the disaster risk cycle, always rooted in the principles of inclusion and non-discrimination. I am committed to building societies where women lead in crisis management and help shape the way we plan and respond. And I look forward to working closely with Sweden on this as well. Ladies and gentlemen, in times of trouble, that is when you find out who your friends really are. Preparedness is not just about anticipating the next crisis, it is also about building trust, protecting people, and standing together when it matters most. Sweden and the EU stronger and better prepared. This is our common future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Today we see enormous investments in the defense industry and increased defense budgets. Do you see the same will when we're talking about these questions when it comes to crisis management, civil defense and so on in the European Union?
For me, it's clearly intertwined. You know, robust preparedness does not come for free, that's for sure. If we want to have robust roads, infrastructures, rail stations, airports, communication capacities. We need to invest on it because this is really crucial when we are facing natural disasters, and we should always keep our critical infrastructures working. So this summer, I know you all know that we will adopt what we call the MFF, which is our next European budget. And to be successful, our preparedness strategy must be founded also as well. So that's exactly what I said, what I defend with my fellow commissioner. We were gathering 2 days ago discussing preparedness, and this is what we are now implementing. It's a very simple concept. It's preparedness by design. It means that we need to mainstreaming preparedness in every policies, in every legislative work, and also in our budget. So preparedness should be involved when we are talking about communication, agriculture, health, because it's touching every areas of our society. And I have also the same message to our member states and to Minister Bohlin as well. We need a council that defends a strong budget for our preparedness strategy. Otherwise, we will not succeed for sure. But the good news is that preparedness have a cost, that's for sure, but it's a good investment. We all know that we are still paying the price of the COVID-19. And so we know that, it's better to prevent than to repair. When a crisis hits, it's good to be prepared. It's also about our competitiveness, about saving our money, strengthening our economy, and it's also about saving lives. We shouldn't forget that this is also about protecting our citizens' lives. So this is a good expenditure, and also we can mixed. I mean, when I was just talking about civil defense, and we have what we call the dual use, we can invest in the subway, for instance, but the subway can be also used as a shelter. But it requires good investment for dual use and civil defense capacities.
We've been touching upon it already, but the former president of the Republic of Finland, Sauli Niinistö, has on the behalf of the European Commission written a report named Safe Together about strengthening European civilian and military preparedness. And in this report, he talks about trust. You mentioned it in your speech as well. That trust is the foundation to build resilience. Would you say that, reflect a bit upon this, is there enough trust within the Union to build resilience on, and how can we increase it even more, would you say?
I can just agree with former Prime Minister, President Niinistö. You know, I met him. I was still what we call Commissioner Designate, I remember. And the first thing he told me was, you have everything you need. You have institutions, you have Center of Emergencies. We have this 24/7 emergency center, ERCC. You have 27 member states and 10 more that are investing in UCPM mechanism. You have a lot of assets, but what you need is trust. Trust and a clear chain of command. To know who does what by when. So trust is a kind of super glue, that puts all the different layers that we need to have a robust strategy that works well together. From the citizens, and that's why we are having this 72 hours of autonomy, of self-resilience, because it's important to know what I can do as a citizen. Before the responders, the local authorities can intervene, you can stay at least 72 hours at home with enough water, with your own medicines in case of, and with food and energy and, a radio and so on, and cash money and all what, it was largely inspired by your own week of autonomy. So this is something that we need to develop, because we have to be aware that our enemy are waiting for the lack of trust, you know, to fueled misinformation, what we call the foreign interferences, and we saw it very recently in Spain during the blackout. You know, for a couple of hours, people didn't know what was the purpose, what was the origin of the blackout. And so it was, you know, cyber attacks and so on, or, you know, a war, kind of war. They were very afraid. But when the people are prepared, they know what is their role. They rely on the information coming from the authorities, and we are working on that also. You have to know that at the European level, we are going to develop a satellite capacities, Galileo, which is the capacity to communicate. It will support the member states through our satellite to communicate. Even in case of blackout, it will be possible. This is also very important, to be transparent and to have the good information. And the more you are well informed, the better you can resist to misinformation, disinformation, and manipulation coming from outside, from Russia, for instance. So in this regard, sharing and information and transparency are really key. And we are also building trust through very concrete action. I was in Spain because, you know, the summer is coming. We know that we are going to face wildfire risks. And we have there what we call our rescue capacities. We have Canadaires that are prepositioned there. It is belonging to the European Union. And we will have also 650 firefighters coming from 14 different member states to be prepositioned during the summer in Greece, in Spain, in France, and in Norway. So it shows solidarity in action. And more you know who does what by when, you have a clear chain of command, you will have this rehearsal, you will have this common training, you get to know better each other, and you trust, and this is where solidarity relies also.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. A warm round of applause, please. I would now like to welcome the Swedish Minister of Civil Defence, Carl-Oskar Bohlin, to share his remarks on this topic in the strengthening of the Swedish civil defence. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and first of all, thank you, Commissioner Lahbib, for coming to Sweden in response to our invitation. I'm hoping that we will be able to provide an interesting program for the entirety of your stay, so thank you so much. I was asked to share a few insights of what we're trying to achieve in Sweden and why. But first, let's start with sort of an outlook. And to start with stating the obvious, the security situation that we all face in Europe is dire. We're facing turbulent times. The rules-based world order, which we've counted on for 80 years and which have served us uniquely well the last 80 years, can no longer be taken for granted. The road ahead is filled with a great amount of uncertainty, where quick and sudden changes can have an immense impact. And the conclusion from this is obviously that we cannot sit around and just wait and see what happens. Time is of the essence, and the sense of urgency needs to be raised across the bar. And therefore it must also be clear to everyone what is the worst case scenario. Well, the worst case scenario for Sweden is the risk of an armed attack against Sweden. And that then is ultimately what we need to be prepared for. And I would say that demands different priorities, but also a different culture in what we are preparing for. It is a very different thing to prepare for handling an antagonist, an armed aggressor, than preparing for peacetime crisis. And that is what we've been doing during the time of strategic relaxation, if one might call it that. The last 30 years, we dismantled the total defense concept that we had during the Cold War, and we replaced it with a peacetime crisis preparedness. And now we're shifting that focus in a very rapid manner. And that demands more from all of us, because preparing for a situation where Sweden is attacked, we're also preparing for a situation where the whole of society is drawn into the consequences of that attack. A peacetime crisis is almost always geographically defined and defined in terms of duration. And that is not the case with an armed conflict. And I think there are crucial conclusions to be drawn from what we've seen in Ukraine. Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine has lasted for over 3 years. And we need to comprehend that Russia's objective with this war is to try to violently overturn the European security order. And what Ukraine has shown us is the fact that total defense, total aggression needs to be met with total defense. And that is what Ukraine has done. And I always stress that that is one of the X factors that was not taken into consideration at the outset of the full-scale invasion. And that is one of the key issues that had made Ukraine successful in regards to the Russian war of aggression, namely that they have mustered resilience in a way that the rest of Europe needs to draw conclusions from, and that is what we're trying to do when we're now rebuilding the total defense concept in Sweden in a very rapid pace. But let me also, before I elaborate on what's being done in Sweden, say that Sweden's commitment to support Ukraine's fight for freedom and sovereignty is strong, predictable, and most important of all, sustained. This is not only morally right, but also our primary means to influence Russia's actions. We must plan and prepare for prolonged confrontation with Russia. Europe must be prepared to handle a situation where Russia also can divert resources to other parts of EU's eastern border, depending on the outcome of the conflict in Ukraine. Russia pursues a goal of weakening the EU and its member states, and they are employing a range of hybrid tactics to influence decision-making, divide societies, destabilize economies, sow divisions among member states, and erode confidence in the democratic form of governance. These are all destabilizing actions that Russia is conducting against Europe. And we must counter Russia's expansions of power by constraining its influence, its freedom of action, and ultimately its ability to do harm. And we must do this with our friends in the EU and our allies in the NATO. The courage that the Ukrainian people have mustered to face the aggressions instills the utmost respect. And the least we could do to show that respect is to take our own preparedness seriously. Our course, therefore, in Sweden is to build our armed forces as strong as possible, our society as robust and resilient as possible, so that there is no doubt that an attack against Sweden or one of our allies will be too costly. The total defense concept, together with diplomatic and political and economic measures, is what will create deterrence from an aggressor from attacking Sweden or exerting influenced by military means. Sweden is currently undertaking the largest rearmament since the end of the Cold War, and this is set to continue. Spending on military defense will increase, and Sweden will meet the new upcoming NATO defense investment pledge. And we're glad that there is also discussion around setting out an ambitious goal for also resilience-related investments in that regard. We're also, by the total defense bill that was adopted last year in Sweden in December last year, historically increasing the spending on civil defense. A new financial framework has been introduced to facilitate sufficient funding for civil defense. From 2028 and onwards, we will have a level of approximately 1.4 billion euros per year in civil defense, which is a historic number. It's a five-fold increased number compared to when this government took office 2.5 years ago. And it entails investments on all the preparedness sectors. There are 10 of them, and within several vital societal functions. And prioritized areas are electronic communications, postal services, energy supply, transports, food and drinking water supply, healthcare and welfare, rescue services, and civil protection. A priority for the civil defense planning during the defense period is to contribute to the military defense capabilities and to supporting national and collective military defense. All of society, from national, regional, and municipal level down to individuals, are now working to increase resilience together with the private sectors, NGOs, and voluntary defense organizations in Sweden. And bit by bit, day by day, Sweden is therefore taking its national responsibility in the collective commitment to strengthen society's resilience in civil defense. We're doing this through a whole of society approach. For example, we're strengthening protection of the civilian population. We're upgrading and modernizing our extensive stock of 64,000 civil defense shelters. We're strengthening the ability for the municipal rescue services to take care of additional tasks during a state of heightened alert or an armed attack against Sweden. For example, by activating civil defense service through civil conscription. We've activated that in the municipal rescue services and the electric supply area, drawing conclusions from the situation in Ukraine, where we can see that certain sectors are put under an additional strain and therefore need an additional supply of personnel, which we are facilitating in this way. And we're trying to strengthen the security of supply by increasing private-public cooperation in order for the supply of goods and services to function even under dire circumstances. National coordination, private-public cooperation, and conditions for production conversion and the establishment of appropriate emergency storage are required. For example, there is stockpiling for healthcare products, for trauma care, and ongoing work on grain storage. The government also has appointed a national advisor for strengthened public-private collaboration, and our business council meets 3 times a year. We're also trying to strengthen cybersecurity because it is a key pillar of a credible total defense, of a credible modern total defense. All activities within civil defense need to have good basic information and cybersecurity. The effects of a cyber attack can have equally severe consequences for socially important functions and critical IT systems as a conventional attack. The government has made historic investments in cybersecurity, and we recently also presented our national cybersecurity strategy with a clear capability target and an associated action plan. We're also strengthening psychological defense and increasing the will to defend. The fact that Sweden has its own authority for psychological defense is internationally unique. We have a long tradition of a high will to defend, and it's important to maintain this. The individual home preparedness, which the Commissioner also alluded to, is of course also a fundamental part of building societal resilience. This all comes down to the fundamental principle that we expect everyone in Sweden to help out in the event of an armed attack against Sweden. And one precondition to be able to do that is that you can take care of yourself in the first place, so that you become an asset rather than a liability to society in terms of severe crisis. And as you noted, we sent out the brochure, the updated brochure, that is unfortunately reflecting the dire security situation that Sweden and Europe finds itself in. And you can find checklists from what the state is expecting of you as a citizens. So it's more important than ever that we work together to strengthen resilience through a whole of society, all hazard approach. In this severe and complex security situations, we need to have cross-border cooperation. For example, critical underwater sea infrastructure is crucial for many countries, as goes for energy infrastructure, for example. So we need to raise the bar across the EU on this level, to work closer together, to strengthen our common resilience, to strengthen standards that put higher requirements on member states. And we look forward to work further on with the Preparedness Union strategy presented by the Commission. Thank you.
It's been around 10 years since Sweden starting to rebuild our civil defense. And if the EU would scale up within this area and do the same journey, do we have any lessons learned from your point of view?
Well, the first lesson would obviously be, don't take as much time as Sweden has done to come to this position, because I usually say that the capability development for the civil defense in Sweden is pictured by a sort of a hockey stick, lying hockey stick graph, where we've been moving across the shaft for quite some time, but now we've managed to come to the blade. So we can see that the capabilities in the Swedish civil defense has actually started to increase the last 2 or 3 years or so. And that corresponds with Sweden putting forward substantial investments for the civil defense. Because if you just say that we will not assign any resources for this, well, not much will happen, because there are always day-to-day activities that different agencies and authorities will prioritize and attend to first. If you don't say that this is a prioritized task, and I would say that is what Sweden has done during the last couple of years, and that is now giving effect on the Swedish capabilities in this regard.
And by its nature and in line with the Swedish history of non-alignment, our total defense is designed according to our administration system, according to our traditions, and so on. Do you see that we could be required to maybe change our system a bit if it's going to work together with an EU system?
Well, I think that inspiration should be gathered from the countries that are furthest ahead. And I would say in terms of capability, maybe Finland is still a bit ahead because they never dismantled their system, but we're clearly, well, due to our geographic location and then non-alignment policy, we were forced to have a very prudent planning for this during the Cold War. And I think there is a lot of institutional memory in this regard in both of our countries that could be put into great use when we're now rebuilding our system. And even though we started from a very low point just a few years ago, I would dare to say that we are, in many regards, a few steps ahead compared to other EU member state countries that are not, clearly speaking, not living within the vicinity of the problem, and the problem, frankly speaking, being Russia.
I also want to follow up on something that the Commissioner Lahbib talked about. She talked a bit about trust and also about equality. Do we have this mindset and keep those sort of values in our heads, in our preparedness as well, would you say?
Well, I would say that is core business in every democratic society, and that goes for Sweden as well. And I would also like to elaborate on one thing, and because when I'm standing here talking about preparing for the consequences of war and an armed attack, that is, of course, unfortunately, something that happens very, very rarely. It hasn't happened in Sweden for 200 years. And does that then mean that we are forgetting everything else? The peacetime crisis preparedness, the consequences of climate change? No, it does not. It just, if you prepare for the worst thing, you will have a very much easier task to handle peacetime-related crisis incidents that are lower down in the threat scale, whereas the other way around is not necessarily true, where we could see that if you're only prepared to handle peacetime incidents, where you're, for example, always relying on the defense forces as a component of your handling of a crisis, you will come short in the event of an armed attack. And we can see what the security situation looked like, and that demands a different perspective from all of us, but that will in turn also leave us better prepared for handling everyday peacetime crisis.
You will get a short final question. In the end of May, you attended a ministerial meeting for a common coalition on strengthening civil preparedness and resilience. May you share some insights from that coalition and maybe some priorities that you identified?
Well, we basically agreed on the fact that we need, as I said in my speech, we need to raise the bar in this regard when it comes to getting this work moving forward on the EU agenda. And we formed a coalition of sort of like-minded countries who sees the preparedness questions as a central issues, and we have high hopes of EU also being a fora for driving regulations in this regard, putting higher demands on member state countries. And I'm glad to say that Sweden took the opportunity to invite this coalition of the willing. So we will host the next meeting in this coalition. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, Minister Bohlin, for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
I will now welcome up the members of the last panel to give their reflections on what have been said. A warm welcome to Sara Myrdal, Director of International Affairs, Head of Department for International Relations, Research and Innovation at Swedish Civil Contingency Agency. And also welcome to Katarina Engberg, Senior Advisor at the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies. In the program you could read that Anna Wetter Ryde was supposed to be here as well, but unfortunately she's stuck at an airport abroad, so she will not attend today. Would you mind hearing these remarks? What are your immediate reflections? Sara, would you like to start?
Well, thank you very much. And am I on here? And thank you to the organizers for inviting us, and thank you for excellent interventions also by Commissioner Lahbib. And I was very inspired by your message about women being leaders in crisis management. Thank you for that. And also, obviously, thank you to our Minister Bohlin. I would like to start with an overall reflection and just stating that the Preparedness Union strategy is indeed very rich in substance. 7 areas, 30 key actions. And I would even go as far as to say that it's a real box of chocolates for all of us who work with security and preparedness around Europe. And even if some of the pieces in this box are sort of classic tasting ones, there are also some quite new flavors. And one example of that is that the EU now is talking about deterrence. And this is not a word or a concept that has been that frequently used in the EU context. It's more a NATO concept. But I'll get back to that in a little while. Another reflection is, of course, when listening also to Minister Bohlin, that the strategy is quite easy to like for us here in Sweden, because it's very much in line with the developments that we have in our country right now. And you mentioned, Minister, the Total Defence Bill and the Defence Resolution, and you've introduced 4 new objectives for civil defence. And if you map those objectives against the 7 areas in the strategy, you will find that they correlate pretty well. So it's just a matter of ticking boxes, I would say, for us here in Sweden. If you allow me, I will also say a few words on how the strategy supports our work from an agency perspective. And I would like to highlight 2 areas in particular. But first, maybe a quick word on MSB as an organization, just as a backdrop to what I will say. And Minister Bohlin sometimes calls us the top node in civil defense. And that is because it is our responsibility to support our government when it comes to directing and coordinating the whole civil defense system. And this is very much a cross-sectoral role that we have. And in this, we're also the main civil counterpart at national level to the armed forces. So we help to drive civil-military cooperation as well. And the agency also has a sector-specific responsibility for the rescue services and the protection of the population. You mentioned the 10 different sectors, Minister, and so one of them is MSB's responsibility. And finally, I also want to mention the role we have within the agency when it comes to security of supply, which is a task where we are sort of ramping up our capacity now very rapidly, and where MSB is also, we function as a node also in that respect, and obviously a lot of public-private cooperation here, which is also one of the areas in the strategy. So in essence, I could say that our mission at the agency also relates to all of the areas in the preparedness strategy. So we are, of course, in full support of the whole of society message and the cross-sectoral perspective in the strategy. On a more specific note, though, I would like to point to 2 areas of particular interest to us. And the first one, which is also very sort of highly emphasized in the strategy, and both of you talked about it, is obviously population preparedness, which is, I would say, actually the core of the strategy. And you can never do enough when it comes to making our populations more aware and better prepared. And even if we've had a lot of focus on this since 2018, when we had our first version of this now famous brochure, it is always a challenging task, reaching out to the population, reaching out to all groups. You mentioned the lady who had been reading the brochure in Braille. Yeah. We also have, I mean, our populations are not static. We have movements of people within Europe. So having a European perspective on this issue of population preparedness is definitely right. And during the Swedish EU presidency, we really pushed these issues. And we even launched a concept called Prepare EU. And we also discussed the idea of a Preparedness Day, which is now one of the proposals in the European Union strategy. We have some experience of this because we have the Preparedness Week since many years back in Sweden in September every year, where MSB works together with the 290 municipalities to strengthen preparedness within the population. Last year's theme was exercises, where we involved people out in the street in our exercises. So that was a novel. Yeah, you should come in September as well. Also, when it comes to reaching out to population, I also want to point to, which is also mentioned in this rich strategy, reaching out to young people and having preparedness on the curriculum. And that is also something that we managed to do in Sweden. You launched this end of last year. So it's now part of the high school curriculum, total defense and preparedness. And this is also something quite important to get to that group. The other area is civil-military cooperation, and this is really top of mind for us in Sweden right now. We heard our minister talk about this. We need to move fast and to build capacity, and civil-military cooperation here is key. And many areas, concrete areas, require cross-border cooperation when it comes to civil-military cooperation. And we need this very close dialogue with our military colleagues. A good example of this is mass evacuation, an area where we started to work with our neighboring countries, and particularly Finland, but also the other countries. Here we need to plan jointly with the military. We need to deconflict military mobility with civil mobility, if you will. So this is a very good example. Another one is dual-use capability development that you mentioned. And I think there are many areas here, but one of them is CBRN, for example. And when we developed our decontamination capacity here, we obviously looked at military standards. Here you have an interoperability dimension as well.
Sorry, I will have to stop you.
Yeah, okay.
You will get back to your final remark. But Katarina, what are your immediate reflections on these issues?
Well, first, let me say that I think it's a privilege and an honor to be part of this very important event, spearheaded by the EU Commissioner on preparedness, among other things, and by the Minister for Civil Defense. I'm also relieved because I think time has come for the European Union to put the civil preparedness at the center of its efforts. And the EU is an important actor in this regard, a really central actor when it comes to those issues. And I'm very pleased if my country and Finland jointly can contribute in any way to forward or to improve the work within the European Union. I think the European Union, just to start with an overarching argument, is building a total defense union. If you add the preparedness union, which is an ambition now, and it's the preparedness strategy with the defense union element, you see scattered building blocks of a total defense union. And I would say that the EU is particularly strong on the civilian side. I say relieved because for Swedes and Finns, as has been pointed out by the minister before, we have always been aware of the fact that would our country ever be struck by war, the civilian population would be affected as well. So this is the way we had been thinking of it historically, and now regaining that sort of territory again. But looking at the images coming out on a daily basis from Ukraine, I mean, it's obvious to everybody the reality that the civilian population is a target of an aggressor. The civilian population and the civilian infrastructure, that's the way of breaking the resistance of a nation, which has not been possible in Ukraine due to this amazing resilience of civilian society, the way of rescue workers running to the houses that have been scattered by Russian attacks. It's an example for all of us how society can make itself less vulnerable if it wants to really resist in case of war. Now, I would say that to be more practical, on a more practical note, building total defense is a tremendously difficult and complicated task on a national level. And then thinking about it in context of the European Union is almost overwhelming because you have so many different awarenesses and structures between member states in the European Union. You know all this, so I shouldn't preach about this, but still trying to imagine the sort of tasks. So it's the different awarenesses, but also the many different layers. Many of the instruments are national, but also European Union plays a very important role in providing some very important instruments for preparedness and civil defense. And the EU has, over the last couple of years, made strides. The COVID health security is just one example of where the European Union has made headway. Health security, critical entities, in this critical entities directive, the NIS2 directive, where our information systems are being becoming more resilient due to the work done by the European Union. So the EU is already a very important actor in this regard. So there is something very important to build on. I think the difficult thing here is implementation. And again, this shouldn't come as a surprise to any of you, because since the task is so complicated and involves so many actors and different structures, I think one has to be very focused and focused on implementation with regard to some very specific issues. And I would recommend from the report that one would focus first on the exercises, because that will reveal sort of vulnerabilities of our societies on the national level, regional level, and the federal EU level. So that's a way of testing the system. Where do we have our vulnerabilities when it comes to critical societal functions? And based on that, elaborate preparedness requirements. I noticed that in the report it says minimum preparedness requirements. Why minimum? Preparedness requirements, and in the report, in the strategy, it's now said that this should be monitored by, there should be a monitoring mechanism to follow up on these recommendations given to member states. I think you have to be stronger, you have to be more forceful. I would look forward to a preparedness law, although I realize it's complicated, it will take time to see if it's feasible at all. And I am aware that there's so many different understandings within the European Union with regard to this. But I think that should be a goal, that in the end you have a law, based of course on this proper division between the national and the federal level within the European Union. But you have to be forceful in order to make headway, because of the importance of the matter. And you have to identify financial means, as has been mentioned here by several. Without financial means, you will not get anywhere. Ministry recommends that 20% of the MFF in the future be dedicated to preparedness and civil defense. I think that's a good recommendation. The operationalization of the solidarity clauses in the Treaty for the European Union, functioning of the European Union in the form of 222 for the civilian side, and the Treaty of the European Union 42.7 for the defense side, operationalization and coordination with NATO. A protocol, as is proposed in the Ministry report, but I think also in the strategy, to coordinate NATO with regard to if these clauses are activated. And why not? I think it's a good thing also to the coalition of willings, member states that feel that is more comfortable with the concept. I realize some member states feel that you shouldn't alarm people, you shouldn't scare people. But if a group of countries can move ahead and put forward some very concrete example of what we want to do, I think it's more easy to get a sort of more common understanding within the European of what this is all about. So these are my remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sara, you're also vice chairman of the NATO Civil Protection Group. What is important moving forward to coordinate what EU is doing and what NATO is doing?
I think you brought up two excellent examples. One of them is exercises, and where some work is already being done. There are attempts at more or less coordinate the CMX and the PACE exercise, and that's excellent. That's a good way of getting to know each other and building joint capacity. I also think that the fact that the EU now is moving into the hybrid domain more clearly and dealing with deterrence as a concept also opens up new possibilities. You mentioned the pre-positioning of firefighting planes. I mean, the EU could work and be deterring together with NATO by pre-positioning capacities to a much greater extent and showing an EU flag and a NATO flag. I also think the areas that are touched upon, military mobility, key area within NATO, but you also need to look at civil mobility, as I said, and to deconflict these areas, also EU-NATO. Minimum preparedness requirements within EU. Within NATO, we have had since 2016 the NATO baseline requirements for resilience. You need to look at this in one context. So those are a few examples.
Moving forward, what would you say are the, would you please highlight some risks and also opportunities? What can be done within the EU resilience within the work? Katarina, you would like to start?
Well, what I just said, being very practical and moving rapidly. I think that's the best way of dealing with this immensely complicated question. So exercises, requirements, eventually a law, financial means, and coordination with NATO. The European Union actually has the instruments for implementing NATO's 7 baseline requirements. So it should be an open goal, to coordinate between NATO and the European Union. And then, of course, I realize that it's difficult for politicians in different member states because there are so many. If you compare Spain to Finland or Sweden, there are different types of awarenesses with regard to these matters. So I think this coalition of willing should try to reach out and get some friends from Southern Europe along. So you bring them in, so you talk to each other. Because if you do that, I think much of the concerns will dissipate. And I think that politicians, it is my impression that EU citizens require politicians to do more in terms of protecting civilian population. And when they fail to do so, whether it's regard to climate change effects in Valencia, electric outage, there is suddenly the demand for accountancy, for responsibility, where it ends up at the feet of the politicians immediately. So trying to reach out and tell them the European Union will now help you in preparing from crisis management leading up to the worst of contingencies to war. We shall help you.
Thank you, and those will actually have to be the final remarks for this seminar. Thank you, both of you, for participating, and thank you for the previous speeches as well. A special thank you to Commissioner Lahbib and Minister Bohlin for participating today, and a warm thank you to everyone who's been listening. At Folk och Försvar, we will actually continue the EU theme next week by discussing Sweden and Finland's 30 years in the European Union, and I hope to see you there. Thank you for coming and wish you a great evening.